Haley McNamara from the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me.
You are now the Executive Director and Chief Strategy Officer.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, I know you to be a strategic genius and very focused on combating exploitation worldwide and in the United States. Could you just share, just for our listeners, what is it that the National Center on Sexual Exploitation does, and what is the main focus?
Yeah, so our goal really is to prevent sexual abuse and exploitation at mass scale. So that means going after those institutional enablers, corporations, the courts, legislation that allows sexual exploitation to flourish. You know, parents today are overwhelmed. It's almost impossible to keep their kids safe. So we advocate for them, but through corporate advocacy, public policy, federal and state, and then also civil litigation on behalf of survivors.
Okay, so that sounds like you have some very clear, defined objectives, a very clear strategy. How did this come together for you personally? How did you start to focus on institutions when it comes to protecting people?
I think just realizing, you know, you can always help one victim, one person who's been harmed by sexual exploitation, and that's so important to do. And the problem with sexual exploitation is so vast. We're talking about childhood exposure to pornography, sextortion, online grooming for various kinds of abuse, including sex trafficking. It's such a vast problem, and people are overwhelmed by it. You know, we've met with survivors of sex trafficking who were directly groomed and exploited through Instagram is one example. And they had their privacy settings set on, but still predators were able to contact them, groom them, abuse them into sex trafficking. And we realized that you can help those people recover, but there will be more predators who are still constantly grooming more and more kids through those platforms. So we need Instagram to have better safety controls to prevent that from happening in the first place. And then very similarly, you know, our laws, our courts, when we have these institutional factors focused on prevention, it can help really go upstream to stop some of those terrible, terrible stories from happening.
Okay, that's great. So I'll give a concrete example. I worked in the child welfare space for a while, and particularly when a crime has been committed against a child. And I noticed that there was often a nexus with pornography.
Yeah.
So what are some of the institutions that are involved that are enabling, normalizing the sexualization of children in the United States?
Yeah. And that's so true. The connection of pornography to all of these other forms of exploitation is very real. And the institutions that are now allowing this, I mean, so the corporations such as social media are definitely a really significant factor. You know, people assume that these companies must have safety mechanisms in place, but very many of them have huge holes in what their safety features are. And sometimes they're even very ineffective. You know, there was one study that came out about Instagram as an example that they tested all of their teen Instagram parental tools, and only 17% of their parental tools actually worked the way that they were described to. So when you see companies like that not taking safety seriously, that's enabling exploitation. It's tolerating it, and it's allowing it to flourish. And then similarly, with our court system, you know, we have some laws that have been overly broadly interpreted, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, to give broad immunity to these companies so that they aren't able to be held liable in so many cases for negligence and other harms. And then public policy, you know, we just always need better laws on the books, especially when we talk about online sexual exploitation. There isn't really comprehensive online safety legislation in America.
Okay, that's a great roadmap. Let's talk about Section 230 and then the broader public policy side, which is what we do here in Arizona.
Yes.
We've enjoyed partnering with NCOSE on some of the anti-trafficking work that we're doing here. What do you think most families, most parents need to know about Section 230? What's the key thing to take away?
This law was written before the internet as we know it today, and it has made it so that these online platforms have this broad immunity from liability. And so this is a problem of incentives. These companies don't have the incentive to prioritize safety when they could prioritize profit and engagement at nearly any cost. So what this looks like is companies at times have even been caught doing things that we argue would put them in jail if they were a human person. One of those examples is Twitter, which I know is a case that we've been involved in together, that you've worked on so closely. So I don't know if you want to talk more about that case specifically, but I think, this is a law that has allowed these companies to act just with impunity on safety. I mean, for 17% of your parental controls to work is a complete abomination. Like that's a choice. These companies are some of the largest in the world, the richest in the world. They are tracking us all the time. There's one study that they can identify when users are feeling insecure, and then based on that feeling that they can identify in real time, based on your behavior on their platform, they'll serve you up ads for beauty products. Yeah. But you're telling me that these platforms can't stop predators from contacting kids, right? It's a matter of incentives.
Is it? We have this robust American tradition of consumer protection. Mm-hmm. We've taken the tobacco industry and largely crippled it, and across the world, we're seeing things like the United Kingdom has a law about tobacco where you see a tobacco-free generation.
Yeah.
So when an organized society really says, "Hey, this is dangerous, this is harmful," you do something about it. To a lesser extent, just the way we handle consumer protection and transportation. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like consumer protection on the technology side has hit its stride yet, or is there a lot more to go?
There's so much further to go. I think there's growing awareness that we need it. I think enough people, unfortunately, have been harmed by it. 1 in 3 kids, a nationally representative survey found 1 in 3 kids has an online sexual interaction with a stranger. 1 in 4 kids believes that online sexual interaction is with an adult stranger online. That scale of harm and impact is waking people up. So I think people do realize we need some consumer protection laws, but so far to date, the internet safety space has been just so unregulated. Yeah.
Let's talk about the Twitter case just a little bit. We've both been working on this case now for a number of years. The facts are really sad, but they're not tragically sad like many of the other cases because the plaintiffs are thriving. They're doing well, but they went through something very hard in their teenage years, and basically exploitive videos of them were put on the platform Twitter, and Twitter didn't take them down even after they reviewed them. So that's shocking behavior. It's surprising behavior, and it's also surprising the legal position that Twitter has been taking the whole time. Now the company is known as X, which is we can't be held responsible for this no matter what.
No matter what. And even though they had, you know this even better than I do as you've been working on the case, they had actual knowledge, like the actual videos of the child sexual abuse material or child pornography were reported to them. They had reports from the child and its family. They had documentation that the child was underage and still let that continue on their platform. And for them to be arguing that they had no liability for it is pretty surreal. And so you've been working on this case so much and bringing it up through the Ninth Circuit. And, of course, we're going to talk about going further, hopefully beyond there. But that was a bit of a complicated ruling from the Ninth Circuit, as I understood it. Yes. There were some things that went in our favor, but ultimately a few really dangerous precedents that were set. Could you maybe share more about that?
Well, so we're recording this in the first week of May.
Yes.
In the middle of May, the United States Supreme Court is going to conference the case, which is where they get together, the justices, the 9 justices, and they decide whether they're going to take the case. So their first opportunity to do that is going to be May 14th. So we can all be praying for that. Yes. It's a really significant moment. And then a variety of things can happen, which can put us on a variety of different timelines. They could rather quickly decide they wouldn't take the case. And at least as the statistics go, the Supreme Court takes very few cases. In this particular situation, we're hopeful because not only is it a strong case with clear facts that really puts the justice issues clear, but also the partners in the anti-trafficking movement have been so powerful in the way they came out with friend of the court briefs, amicus briefs, starting with the National Center on missing and exploited children, which, really understands the scope and scale of this problem in the United States. And, one of the things in their brief that just took my breath away was they reported to the court that the week they filed their brief, that the abuse videos from our clients in that Twitter case were last reported to them the prior week. Wow. So abuse that happened 6 years earlier, and it's still reverberating on the internet and being reported to law enforcement. It's really tragic, and that's what it means to be a victim of child pornography. It's the crime that continues to be perpetrated over and over again.
Yeah.
So it's really key overall. You alluded to the fact that there's a mixed decision on the consumer protection side. That was the door that the Ninth Circuit left open. Maybe there's enough there to show that Twitter has designed an unsafe product. So potentially that issue could ultimately come back in the case, and already I think it's precedential.
Yes. Yeah.
For that aspect. Now you have a lot of experience thinking about the safety of the products, and again, here we are in the early spring. Not just 90 days ago, we had 2 incredible jury verdicts on this issue. One of them you're deeply involved in, out of the state of New Mexico. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yes. So this was a huge precedent set by the New Mexico State Attorney General's office, and they sued Meta for a couple of different reasons, some addiction, and also for failing to protect children from sexual exploitation and abuse. This case, I was deposed for because of our work with the Dirty Dozen list, and the fact that I've sat across the table from Meta for many years, asking them to improve, bringing that example that I shared earlier on about survivors on sex trafficking on Instagram being groomed, being exploited. And we have years and years of evidence of us bringing these cases, these problems, survivor testimonies, research, screenshots of evidence, and of Meta being slow, delaying, making piecemeal solutions to these problems. And this case was really significant too, because the state attorney general's office actually set up a fake account as a 13-year-old and was quickly inundated with luring, with grooming, with predators trying to contact this fake account set up by their office. And what ultimately resulted is one of the first jury trials that actually held a social media platform liable for facilitating or harming children through sexual exploitation. And that was to the tune of $375 million. It's a slap on the wrist to Meta, but really significant victory. And we're very hopeful that the precedent that's going to set will help other cases follow suit.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about General Raul Torres and his leadership.
Yeah.
It's precedent setting.
Yes.
It's groundbreaking also.
Yes.
How great is that to see an attorney general, and in our culture, a lot of consumer protection, a lot of safety for the state citizens is really the responsibility of attorneys general.
Yes.
So by stepping out like that, that's not just innovation. It's something that can protect people even outside of New Mexico.
Absolutely. It's leadership. And I'm very hopeful that it's leadership that will be replicated. They say that courage is contagious. And I think once you get that kind of a victory, I suspect there'll be others who follow suit. And that goes back to that problem of incentives. We just want big tech to be incentivized to protect kids online. And so I do think that these lawsuits play a role in helping rebalance where their priorities are.
And it was only about a week later that in an entirely different part of the country, another jury also found against big tech.
Yes. Yeah, that was in California, and that was on behalf of one plaintiff, one girl who experienced significant harm from social media addiction. And I believe that lawsuit was against Meta and also YouTube. And a lot comes out too from these trials. By actually getting to trial, so many internal documents are revealed to the public that were never known before. So in this California case, just information about how they were intentionally building their platforms even to mimic slot machines in Vegas, just to keep that dopamine going, that they had internal research documenting that they knew that it was addictive. Similarly, in the New Mexico case, internal documents came out that Meta had knowledge there were around 500,000 children being sexually exploited on their platforms a day in their English-speaking platforms, and they had internal documentation acknowledging that the problem was likely far worse than that. So that's another service that these lawsuits create, is then you have that information out to the public and people can realize that sexual exploitation online is at the scale that it's at right now. It's not an inevitability. There's so much more that these companies could be doing.
You mentioned the Dirty Dozen list. Do you think it was the Dirty Dozen list that connected NCOSE to the litigation in New Mexico?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, the Dirty Dozen list, we name 12 mainstream companies every year that are facilitating sexual exploitation or profiting from it. The goal of that is not litigious. Our goal is to raise awareness in the media and also for grassroots people to be able to take action. They can contact the companies. We do think, the private sector does respond to consumer demand sometimes, and they might not realize that people actually want safe products for their kids to be on. So every year we release this list and people take action. They contact the companies, and it's been wonderful to see that every year we do see policy changes come as a result. So we've had improvements at Instagram. We've had improvements at TikTok, Google, Meta, Hilton Worldwide, a number of these companies. They do respond, at least in part. Sometimes we wish they would go further, especially at the social media companies.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of a new dimension that's been revealed through these lawsuits is we also are putting them on notice of harms, and they can't argue that they're completely unaware of these issues because I know they're aware. I've sat across the table from them and talked to them about it.
Yes. So you've got your one tool that brings about transparency, accountability, and education. Can you think of some concrete, specific changes in corporate behavior that you can tie back to the work of the Dirty Dozen List initiative?
Yes. So one is with Instagram, making it more difficult for adult strangers to contact children and turning direct message features off for children under the age of 15. What was interesting, too, as a result of that is we then went to TikTok and we said, well, hey, Instagram turned off direct messaging for young teens, and then TikTok was willing to do that as well. I think one other great example is Google Chromebooks. So you might remember, especially during the pandemic, online learning it grew at such a rampant rate around the country, and Google Chromebooks started being spread around schools more than ever before, record high sales, but they were being given to schools without any default safety features turned on. And when we first went to Google, they said, well, that's the teacher's job, that's the school administrator's job. And what teacher has time to go through and do, 12 or 20 step safety mechanisms, turning them on for all of their students on every single laptop that's being issued? We told Google, you have the power in the situation. If you're selling this laptop to a school, it's going to be used for education by a minor, just turn the safety features on by default. And so very thankfully, they did that in 2021. So we were able to recognize them for that at that time.
So it's the resources, NCOSE's Dirty Dozen list, and the 2026 list is out.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. Yeah. The list is out. So it probably wouldn't surprise people. Some of the companies on there, Snapchat, of course, is a huge platform for sextortion and also childhood exposure to pornography. X, formerly Twitter, is on there, largely as we're pointing to this case and the need for that to be heard by the Supreme Court. We also, for the first time, named social media founder. We named Mark Zuckerberg himself personally, because at this point, he owns Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, so many of these different platforms. And, the harms, especially as revealed by this New Mexico case, we think he needs to put his hands on the steering wheel and right the ship. We think the responsibility now lands on his desk at this point.
Okay. Well, thank you for that service. That's really powerful. It's really important work. Let's talk about your public policy efforts just a little bit. We've had the joy of partnering with NCOSE this year in Arizona. What we've been focusing on is making sure that sex buyers or would-be sex buyers face severe penalties and that there's a disincentive there. you talk about why that's important to focus on the demand side when it comes to that?
Yeah, it's so vital to have strong accountability for sex buyers and kind of the marketplace of sex trafficking. Sex buyers are the sole revenue source. The only reason why sex traffickers are recruiting, grooming, luring, coercing victims into that situation, into that abuse, is because sex buyers are paying the money for it. And it's your basic economics. The more demand that there is for a product, the more incentive there is for traffickers to recruit and harm victims in the process. So there's great progress can be made by holding sex buyers accountable.
What we looked at when we looked at the fabric of the law in Arizona was they're treated the same. The prostituted person essentially had the same crime on the books as the buyer of the sex. And that's not equitable. That's not recognizing the patterns of coercion. So that was something that in conversations with Eleanor and others on your team, we decided, hey, we'll pull it apart. Independent crimes. And that way the state can focus on accountability on one side and providing compassionate services for people who are in that position where they're being held down by someone else.
Yes. Yeah. Just so important. And I know that that's likely in this next year going to continue being a focus in Arizona. And it's something that around the country we're trying to work with different states on as well. It's just so important, and so important to have each state take responsibility for that, because it can radically change the amount of sex trafficking that's happening in an area.
So many of the things we've talked about were on the let's call it so many things have been on the intervention side. On the prevention side, equipping parents is such a powerful strategy. Are some new tools available, or what do you recommend when you're sitting down with parents and saying, here's your chance to really focus on keeping your children safe in an online connected environment?
Yeah. Well, first, I always feel like I want to give parents a hug, because it is overwhelming, the challenge that's before parents in today's modern age. There's constantly new apps. Parental controls are ever changing. There's a new platform every other day. And then the parental controls don't work sometimes as well. And so it's very overwhelming for a parent. So, obviously having conversations with your children is always important, trying to stay on top of parental controls, but it's a full-time job for a parent to stay on top of. And so that's why we've developed a resource that we hope will help meet parents where they're at. And that is called the Parent Center. It will launch on May 14th. And it's essentially an AI chatbot that pulls together trusted resources. So the way that we've built this is to not pull from the open internet. A parent might be able to go to Grok or ChatGPT and ask similar questions, but there are a variety of harmful responses we've even found from that. Even examples, Grok once linked a parent to a pornographic resource when they're trying to ask for advice on how to talk to their child about the harms of pornography. So this pulls from great resources like Thorn, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and it will help meet parents where they're at. So if you just need an answer right now, how my child was just exposed to pornography, how do I talk to them about it? If you just need a guide for how do I talk to my first grader about online safety in a way that doesn't scare them? And then this resource can give you some conversation guides and then links to resources that can give you even more advice. And also if you're in crisis, if you just don't know where to start, that's so often what parents are asking, where do I start? This will help link you in with some of the best accredited resources available. So that will be launching soon, and we're really hopeful that it will just help parents and meet them where they're at.
Well, that's wonderful. Congratulations on that. So we're talking about the Parents Center at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. We're recording this pre-launch, but we'll make sure that it's in the podcast notes so that
great.
Everyone has a chance to check that out. And that's our highest recommendation, is that the law doesn't catch up with technology well, but the strategy is most important for parents. And as a parent, it changes from year to year, month to month, week to week. You're going to help everybody stay current, and that's what's really crucial there.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate that. Thank you for your partnership.
Thank you.
Thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for the vision of a movement. Not just having it be an organization. One of the things I really value about NCOSE is the recognition that it's the coalitions that will keep everything together in
Yes.
movement. And collectively, we can have a culture that is safer for children.
Absolutely. And we all have a role to play. So whether you're a parent raising your own children, whether you're involved in your state legislators, whether you're just even sending an email to a company to encourage them to do better, every person can do something. And when we're all speaking out and playing our part, it's a really powerful movement. I do believe that we're on the verge of some real landscape shifts for sexual exploitation, where human dignity and child protection will be far better appreciated and advocated for. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about human flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
It's about not tolerating exploitation that we could actually do something about,
Yes.
so that we can actually see the hope for the future that we all desire for all of our kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Haley McNamara, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for standing for families across the country.
Well, thank you.